surely you recognize that if the idea is that claiming to be the Messiah or something like that is not enough for a death sentence,
That's right.
then what Jesus has to have done in that trial, in order to get a death sentence, must have been to say something that the high priest immediately interpreted as him claiming to be Yahweh. That means that he has to expect that the coming Son of Man would be Yahweh himself.
One, you just made an awesome case for me, right? If he's just thinking of...
Alex O'Connor presses David Wood on if Jesus really did claim to be God, and did Jesus really be worshipped like God? So let's get right into it. We're going straight into the discussion after their debate, and this is just the best part about it, I think, in my opinion. So here we go.
Well, I have some questions, perhaps, to ask David about his position on Jesus' relationship to the Father, with particular regards to the authority that he derives from the Father. So, one question, for example. Why do you think that Jesus prays before raising Lazarus from the dead?
The Old Testament says that God is the God of all flesh. If a divine being were to become incarnate, as is claimed of Jesus, and that divine being really became a flesh and blood human being like Jesus, then if he's also had an eternal relationship with the Father, then I don't know if I'd expect him to be an atheist when he entered into creation. So in other words, if the Christian picture is correct, you've got Father and Son for all eternity. Son enters into creation. What's he going to be, an atheist? If he is going to, as part of it is if he's going to be the ideal human or something like that.
Yeah.
And so
the Son of Man, one might say.
As far as what Jesus is going to do, you would continue the eternal relationship that you've had with the Father, and you would do that through prayer. So,
what I mean to say is, could Jesus have risen Lazarus from the dead of his own accord, on his own authority?
I suppose, yeah.
I suppose.
Because that all authority has been given to him.
It's been given to him by God, right? Which the way that I read that is that the Father has delegated the authority that is rightfully his to Jesus. And it's often said to me that Jesus raising people from the dead of his own authority is actually an indication of his divinity. Because we have Old Testament passages of people raising people from the dead, like Elijah and Elisha. And the point is always made that, well, they pray before they rise from the dead. Jesus doesn't pray. But before he raises Lazarus, in John chapter 11, he looks upward and says, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so they may believe that you have sent me. And when he says this, he cries out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. So Jesus is not only praying before raising Lazarus, but also saying that I always do this. It's just I'm doing it right now publicly, so there's no confusion that you're the one who sent me to do this. And so, even in instances where Jesus appears to perform miracles of his own accord, such as calming the storm, or indeed raising other people from the dead, like the widow's child, he tells us here in John's Gospel that he always is in communication with God beforehand, but right now he's saying so publicly, so that people will know that he sent him. Why does Jesus...
I don't see where this is a negative towards Jesus claiming to be God. Because in the Trinity, we believe that they are in perfect relationship with one another, and they're always conveying what it's like. They talk about things. Prayer is talking to God. So I don't see how that is a distraction or a negative towards Jesus talking to the Father before he raises Lazarus from the dead. Let's see what David Wood has to say.
To pray before he raises Lazarus from the dead.
I mean, this is the exact same chapter where Jesus declares himself the resurrection and the life.
That's right.
And it's in the same book where Jesus says that he's the one who raises the dead at the resurrection. Everyone who's in their graves will hear the voice of the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
So if you're thinking that when we talk about Jesus, we're thinking of him as some rogue deity who does things on his own. I mean, that's basically the entire meaning of John chapter 5. John chapter 5 is basically one response to this. Jesus heals on the Sabbath. And this freaks him out because they say, hey, what are you doing? He says, well, the Father's working until now, I'm working too.
Yep.
And so since the Father's working, I get to work. You all don't get to work, I get to work. And then they accuse him of claiming to be equal to God. And then he explains it. That it's a verse that Muslims use. They say, he says, by my own self, I can do nothing. But if you look at what he's saying, it's, I can do nothing separately from the Father. But that's the same chapter where he claims that he's the final judge, where he claims that he's the one who raises the dead at the resurrection, and he explains it and says, for the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. The only way you'd honor the Son the same way you honor the Father is if they have the same nature and attributes. You wouldn't honor anyone else like you honor God.
Interesting. Do you believe
And so
that?
Jesus is saying that the reason he's the one who judges everything is so that we honor him the same way we honor the Father. That sounds...
Do you believe that the Father has a distinct loving relationship to the Son compared to the loving relationship he has to all of us?
That's a good question. David Wood made a great point saying that all the Pharisees knew what he was claiming to be. All the Pharisees knew what he was claiming to be because he was saying that he was God or equal to God. Therefore, the Pharisees wanted to kill him. Like, they knew what he was trying to say.
Yep.
Only because I've heard you make this point before, that he says that it's that word "as" is quite important, what you just said, so that he will honor, so that they will honor me just as they honor the Father. That word "just as" is kathos, which I mentioned earlier. That's also used when Jesus says, so they will know loved me just as you have loved them. So if we're going to be consistent in our usage of the term here, if Jesus is saying like that they will honor you just as, or that they'll honor me just as you honor the Father, then the loving relationship has to be treated in the same way, right?
Well, I think you can say, I'm trying to think, if you say that, you know, I could say I love this person just as I love my wife. And yeah, you'd be right. I could say, well, I just mean I love both of them, but not in the, you know, that wouldn't necessarily be saying I love that person exactly as I love my wife.
But that's why there are two words in the Greek. That's why there's like the word for as.
No, I'm fine there. I'm talking about, you have to interpret words in context.
Yeah.
And what's the context of this? It's Jesus claims that since the Father's working, he's working also. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because the discussion among the rabbis was,
does God work on the Sabbath?
Does God work on the Sabbath?
Yeah.
And so Jesus is working, so God works on the Sabbath because he's upholding and sustaining the universe, therefore I get to work on the Sabbath as well. And then, hey, you're claiming to be, they think he's claiming to be another God. And he clarifies, no, by myself I can do nothing. He points us out, and in this context, he's the final judge. And so you will honor the Son just as you honor the Father. There, in context, it would be very strange to say, well, I just mean honor me in some sense, like you honor the Father, but not in that way. The Old Testament, Yahweh's the one who sets up his throne to judge. Jesus is the one who says all judgment is given to him.
Given, yeah.
Yeah. And so if all judgment is given to him, and keep in mind, the Old Testament says Yahweh is the one who's going to judge. And you're saying, yeah, but it's given to Jesus.
Yeah.
And he says it's so that we honor him the same way we honor the Father.
Yeah, okay, so I want to talk about this Sabbath moment because this is quite important. This is in John chapter 5 as well. This whole episode sort of hinges on the idea that Jesus is working on the Sabbath. He says, my Father is working, so am I. So your interpretation of this is to say that, well, my Father in heaven, that is God, is working on the Sabbath, so am I, therefore I'm God. This story of Jesus working on the Sabbath is reported in multiple Gospels. In Mark's Gospel, when he's found working on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees say to him, this is Mark chapter 2, look, why are they doing that? It's that which is not lawful on the Sabbath. What does Jesus say in response? Have you not heard what David did? Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? And they enter the house of God and take the food which was not lawful on the Sabbath. So Jesus justifies his breaking of the Sabbath by referring to another human being who also broke the Sabbath. He then tells us that the Sabbath was made for mankind and not mankind for the Sabbath. A very famous quote. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Bearing in mind that although...
And the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.
Yes, bear in mind that although in the Greek, the definite article is given to Jesus when he uses the term Son of Man, It's complicated by the fact that Son of Man without the definite article is just a way of saying human being. So there are some scholars such as Morris Casey who believe that these Son of Man sayings have been corrupted, at least some of them, from originally saying a Son of Man, or the Son of Man in the sense of just meaning a human being. Now, why would that interpretation be correct here? Because Jesus says, firstly, when he's accused of breaking the Sabbath, he says, well, David did the same thing. Was David sinning? The implication is no, which means it can't just be God who breaks the Sabbath. He then says that the Sabbath was made for man, humans, not humans or man for the Sabbath. Therefore, he says, the word is therefore, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. If the Son of Man in some context just means a human being, that's how early church fathers interpreted it, for example. In fact, some of the early church fathers translated the Son of Man as the Son of Mary, because they thought it was Jesus indicating that he was the son of a human being and he was only born of Mary. Given that undertone for this phrase, the Son of Man, how else can I read this passage except Jesus saying, yeah, I'm working on the Sabbath, so did David, and that wasn't wrong. The Sabbath was made for mankind, therefore mankind is Lord of the Sabbath. If it's only God who can work on the Sabbath, then why does Jesus appeal to David?
You're talking about two completely different passages. You're talking about this situation, and Jesus, I was talking to a Jewish guy in Israel, and he's not a Christian, but he said, hey, Jesus' way won. Jesus' way actually won. The way of Jesus won.
Oh, sure.
He viewed Jesus as like a religious reformer sent against religious extremism and so on. There, Jesus is talking about like preserving life and so on. The accusation in John 5 is different, but I'm pointing to John because you're going with John.
Yep.
In John 5, he says the Father's working, and so he gets to work too.
That's right.
And again, if you read this, there's no way to interpret this as Jesus claiming to be some, just another human being or something like that.
Well, I don't think Jesus is claiming to be just another human being. But although we are talking about two different passages here, if the reason that Jesus gives, because bear in mind, there are multiple ways to interpret this. When he says, well, God's working, so why not I? There are multiple ways to interpret this. Either Jesus is, again, quite explicitly claiming to be God, which again is quite mystifying given that this doesn't seem to provoke the same kind of reaction. If it's well recognized that God is the Lord of the Sabbath and Jesus is claiming himself as a title, the Son of Man, to be Lord of the Sabbath, or in this instance, just claiming the authority because God is working, so am I, it's strange that it doesn't cause the same kind of fuss. But the other interpretation is that Jesus is saying, well, if God can work on the Sabbath, why not anybody else? If God can work, why not me? And that just doesn't, your interpretation just doesn't square with me with Mark's gospel. I mean, the question I asked was, why does he refer to David in justifying his working on the Sabbath?
We're talking about John.
Yes. But I'm saying,
you get
Jesus is saying, I and the Father are one, and guess what? My Father is working. He's still calling God his Father. That's a big difference.
You can have different reasons for doing things in different situations. I mean, as far as John, so Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him, not only because he was breaking the Sabbath, but was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. With God.
Yes.
And so that's when Jesus goes, and if he's trying to say that, if he's trying to say something about it's okay to break the Sabbath or you don't have to work on the Sabbath anymore or something like that, it's a strange direction to go in that he makes all these claims. He can do only what the Father sees because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son gives life to whom he is pleased to give it. The Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father. That's when he goes on to say that he's the one who raises the dead. Time is coming and has now come when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to judge because he is the Son of Man. And then he goes on to say that the dead are going to be raised. My point is zeroing in on one little point and saying, maybe this is just, you're missing kind of the big picture. This is...
But I'm noticing the words granted and given or authority there. This idea that Jesus raises the dead is not exactly clear in John chapter 5. Like if we look at the words that we're actually dealing with here, The Father judges no one but has entrusted all judgment to the Son. Presumably the Father could judge if he wanted to. He's made a decision to entrust this to the Son, meaning that the Son doesn't have this power necessarily. If the Son has this power necessarily, it's not something that needs to be entrusted to him in the way that the Father then would not have it. He then says, very truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who has sent me has eternal life. And goes on to say that the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live.
Hear the voice of the Son of God.
Yeah. Now,
he's the Son of God, right? Jesus?
That's right.
You're agreeing that he's claiming to be the Son of God.
Yeah, so they'll hear his voice and they'll be raised.
Okay. So he's still... Is he claiming to be God or not? The Son of God, at the end of the day, he's claiming divinity. He's claiming to be God. Son of God is God. Let's not get it twisted. He's using so many verses just to point out random things, but then misses the whole idea of Jesus being God in the first place.
Dead. But how do we, who is doing the raising here? And how do you know?
You're saying we're going to hear, people are going to, so you're saying someone else is raising them.
God.
When they hear the voice of the Son of God. So
That's
they're
right.
dead. They're just bones. They hear the voice of the Son of God. And then someone else raises them.
For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to also have life in himself.
Life in himself.
Yes, any power that Jesus has here is given to him by the Father. Why is Jesus, if God, in need of being given this power by the Father?
You have this is the exact same issue that you have in Daniel 7, where the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven approaches the Ancient of Days, and he is given authority, glory, and sovereign power. So it's why is he being given authority and glory and sovereign power?
Yeah.
But even before that, it's the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven.
Yeah.
That's how he approaches. But again, it's Yahweh who comes with the clouds. So he's Yahweh, and then something happens, and then he's given...
The Son of Man is Yahweh. Do you think that that was how Daniel 7 was interpreted by anybody before?
Daniel saw a vision.
That's
but
right.
This is one of the issues as far as this is one of the issues that comes up in the two powers in heaven.
Yeah.
Because it's, again, Yahweh is the only one who comes with the clouds in the Old Testament. And here you have the Son of Man who receives worship and so on, and is worshipped by all nations. But notice, he approaches, and then he's given authority, glory, and sovereign power. But if you line that up with the Creed in Philippians, if you line that up with John 1 and so on, you get kind of a big picture. And you can take like John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and then the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's after all things are created through him. And you find the same thing in Philippians 2, early Christian creed. When it's in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. So these are, you have someone who is in nature God over here, someone who is the Word through whom all things are created, and then enters creation, and then lives as Jesus, dies. And I would interpret it, since you have the ending in Matthew where Jesus approaches and he's worshipped there, and he says that all authority in heaven and earth has been given to him. So the idea is he becomes a servant. He's in very nature God. He takes on the nature of a servant, and then he lives as a servant. And the irony of this statement where he says the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. The irony there is he's the Son of Man. He's supposed to be served by all. And he says that he came to serve. And so he's living as a servant during this life. Then he dies. He rises from the dead.
There's a lot here, right?
Yeah.
I want to go right back, because we started with this idea of the Son of Man coming on the clouds, meaning that he's Yahweh.
Yes, obviously, and that is him claiming to be God. God, that's the only way to see it. That's who the prophecy is about in Daniel, in this vision.
Do you think that's how Daniel interpreted his vision? Do you think that's
I believe Daniel saw a vision and recorded his vision.
Do you think that's how the Sanhedrin interpreted Daniel 7? When Jesus comes for his trial, and he quotes Daniel 7, and says that you'll see the Son of Man riding on the clouds of heaven, do you think that the problem there was that Jesus was claiming to be God, and that's something that no human being can do. Because Daniel 7 is part of the Jewish scripture. They were expecting the coming of this Son of Man. So if it's obvious that the Son of Man was going to be Yahweh, then the Sanhedrin should have expected that the coming Son of Man would have been Yahweh. They might have thought that Jesus wasn't him. But do you think that the Sanhedrin were expecting whoever the rightful Son of Man was, who was to come, would be identical to Yahweh? And if not, why did they not read that into the passage as obviously as you think that they should have done?
People were basically confused by these passages. That's the impression you get. They go in all sorts of different directions, and, oh, this is referring to the Messiah. No, this is referring to some sort of angel. No, this is referring to this. No, that's... I'm talking about what the text says. The Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven. All before that, it's always Yahweh who comes on the clouds. And so if you were looking at that and you didn't, if you didn't have the idea of, wait a minute, it just can't be. It's impossible that that is referring to God, because you've got the Ancient of Days right there. If you're not reading, I mean, and really, I don't even know what to do if you're saying that. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about anyone.
Yeah.
If you're reading that and going, no, it doesn't seem like this is God. He comes with the clouds of heaven, but then he's worshipped by all nations and has an everlasting kingdom. Mm-hmm. If you're just reading that, if put it this way, if you didn't have the Ancient of Days in the picture and you're reading this description, comes on the cloud of heavens, worshipped by all nations, they obviously God.
Yeah, so
the mystery comes in. The mystery comes in when it's, wait a minute, we've got the Ancient of Days here, so this is sounding like
that's right.
Two divine beings, and we just can't have that.
Real quick, so we were gone through about 20 minutes. David, are you comfortable staying here, or do you want to ask Alex some questions now?
We keep
going on this over there.
If someone's going to rule in all of its glory for eternal life, everlasting life, who do you think that's going to be? Is that God or some random person? When Jesus is claiming to be the Son of Man, that's God.
Just making sure.
Of course, the point was, or is, in the Christological dispute, that Jesus is accused of blasphemy at his trial, and that this is evidence that he was claiming to be God through his identification with the divine Son of Man, because that's how it's interpreted by the high priest, because he accuses him of blasphemy. Does that mean that the high priest was expecting the Son of Man to be Yahweh himself? Do you think that that is the interpretation that the high priest had of the Danielic vision of the Son of Man?
I would say they would obviously have interpreted that passage in Daniel, or claimed to be the Son of Man, in that sense. If you're just saying, hey, I'm a son of man, I think they'd be fine with it.
Well, yeah, of course, in the Aramaic in which Daniel 7 is written, it's one like a son of man, one like Bar Nash, which just means one like a human being.
Yeah, so you'd clarify that, and that's the point, like a human being, and yet he comes with the clouds of heaven. So he's coming with the clouds of heaven, he's Yahweh, and yet he's like a son of a man.
That's right.
Yeah.
You understand that in the history
as far as how they would interpret it, they could have a range of interpretations that we don't know what this means. But we know that the guy who built my cousin's table in Nazareth should not be making this claim.
Sure. So is that enough to be... So suppose that their interpretation was, say, a messianic vision of Daniel 7. This carpenter claiming to be the Messiah, would that have been enough to accuse him of blasphemy?
Claiming to be the Messiah is not a death sentence. All kinds of people claim to be the Messiah.
So the reason I'm pressing this point is because when I say,
why did he get a death sentence then? Why did they rip their clothes to throw stones at him? Because, guys, it was more than just claiming to be the Messiah. He was claiming to be God.
Believe that the Son of Man was going to be Yahweh himself. I think that's quite implausible. And I think you recognize that in saying, well, look, there are loads of ideas that they could have had. It was quite confusing. But if Jesus wouldn't be accused of blasphemy for merely claiming to be the Messiah, if you had a messianic interpretation, he wouldn't be accused of blasphemy for claiming to embody the nation of Israel, if you have the idea that the Son of Man represents Israel, which is another view. It has to be.
Israel comes on the clouds of heaven.
It has to be.
And is worshipped by all nations.
I'm not. That's my interpretation. Okay. I'm saying that in the history of the interpretation of Daniel 7, that has been a popular interpretation. Yeah, of course, the four beasts which come before represent different nations, and the one like the Son of Man is Israel. But the question I'm asking you is, surely you recognize that if the idea is that claiming to be the Messiah or something like that is not enough for a death sentence.
That's right.
Then what Jesus has to have done in that trial, in order to get a death sentence, must have been to say something that the high priest immediately interpreted as him claiming to be Yahweh. That means that he has to expect that the coming Son of Man would be Yahweh himself. Is that what you think what the high priest thought of Daniel's vision?
One, you just made an awesome case for me, right? If he's just thinking of the
I don't get where he's going with this. The whole argument is, did Jesus claim to be God? And he's stuck in the Messiah thing, but at the end of the day, he's claiming to be God, and that's why he got killed. I mean, obviously there's other reasons for wanting him to die, for control and power and everything, but him claiming to be God, for certain things, they tore their clothes and wanted to stone him.
the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven as the Messiah, then, oh, okay, this guy claimed to be the Messiah. Let's maybe we have to deal with the Romans or something like that. But it's not this terrier clothes blasphemy sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What you find in that passage, people struggle with that. Again, the reason is because it sounds like it's talking about Yahweh when the Ancient of Days is Yahweh. That's it. So you come up, you try to explain it in other ways. Could this be the Messiah? It just doesn't fit. Could this be the nation of Israel? It doesn't fit. There are all these interpretations, but it's clear if a guy says you will see the Son of Man coming with at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Yeah, it doesn't seem like they were taking that to just be a claim to be the Messiah.
That interpretation, and you're right, that I'm bolstering the case here that Jesus must have been claiming to be Yahweh. What I'm saying is that if your position is correct, and that is the only thing that he could have been accused of blasphemy for, then you have to presuppose that the high priest had that interpretation of Daniel 7, which just seems so implausible to me. That that's what they thought Daniel 7 meant. So that's what they thought at that time that it meant. That this Son of Man, who they did expect to come, would be Yahweh himself. Is that what you think they thought? Because you have to, for this to run.
I don't have the records of the high priest. If he says this guy just claimed to be the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, and again, if you just read the passage, if you just read in Daniel 7, if you didn't have the Ancient of Days there, it would be indisputable it's talking about God. But you've got the Ancient of Days there. So what's the context of this? First century, they're dealing with this two powers in heaven issue. And they don't know how to deal with it. They're coming up with all sorts of explanations for what this second power is. And then Jesus claims to be one of them.
When does the two powers in heaven, idea, heresy, if you want to call it that now, when does that begin to emerge?
BC.
What evidence do you have of the popularity of the two powers in heaven idea in Second Temple Judaism?
The main discussion that's used, like in Siegel's book, is the later rabbinic commentaries. But so you have
in like the late 1st and 2nd century, right?
Yeah, that's when they're talking about
it because it's a big deal.
That's when Jewish orthodoxy is forming.
So in other words, it's a relatively fringe position beforehand.
No, it was fairly popular.
What's your evidence for that? As far as I understand, it's a relatively fringe position.
You have all these issues that are in the Old Testament, but then you have the Targums. You have the Targums that are they're putting Old Testament passages into Aramaic and so on, and they start giving some interesting translations of some of these passages and so on, and treating. There's a lot of other issues, like even with the name and with the word, and that's why Boyarin says the ideas are already there, because you have passages where they're interpreting the word, where they're interpreting the word of God as a personal agent and so on. So the idea is that it's drawing a parallel between that and John's gospel.
James McGrath on the two powers. The evidence surveyed thus far gives no support for dating the origins of the controversy even to the 2nd century. It is of course possible that the controversy did arise in the 2nd century, but it has not yet had sufficient impact to leave any clear or explicit trace in the traditions and literature from that period.
When you have the rabbis forming Jewish orthodoxy, they're clearly responding to the issue of the two powers in heaven.
Yeah, when's that happening?
Yeah, that's later, but they're talking about things that happened earlier.
But because remember, what we're talking about here is the idea of the Son of Man that the high priest would have had at Jesus' trial. If the two powers in heaven idea is something that only emerges in the late 1st and 2nd century...
No, that's when it's being labeled a heresy. That's when they're declaring it a heresy, right. And they're setting out to refute it.
But what I'm asking is why is it that if this is already a controversy that has emerged and is extant to the extent that the high priest believes it, then why is it leaving no trace in our traditions and literature from that period.
What traditions do you have? What commentaries are you talking about from the first century?
Well, that's a silence thing, because I don't have commentary. Well, what commentaries do I have that don't mention it? That's a bit of a broad question. I'm asking what commentaries you have that do.
If the rabbis are talking about these earlier controversies and they're dealing with, because you have the Christians went one way with it.
Yes.
You had the Gnostics. It became an issue for the Gnostics because the Gnostics interpreted, they believed in the two powers in heaven, and they said they're basically in conflict. The two powers are in conflict. Yep. And so the Gnostics ran with that. And then you had Jewish mystics who were running with the issue.
You think the Gnostics believed in the two powers in heaven heresy as you've described it?
They believed in the two powers.
Because as far as I really
Alex O'Connor is the one who is doing all the grilling, like asking the questions. But I did hear, though, that David was trying to do this evangelistic approach. Like, give me your best arguments, all of the things that you have a problem with, and I will do my best to respond. And every time, he's given amazing responses. 100%. And I think you guys should go watch the whole thing for yourself to see, but this is so good. Matthew 9:6 says, "So I will prove to you that the Son of Man has the authority on earth to forgive sins." Then Jesus turned to the paralyzed man and said, "Stand up and pick up your mat and go home." Very cool. Go watch the entire thing. I highly recommend it. Super, super interesting. Let me know in the comments below what you guys thought, who won the debate. And thank you guys so much for watching. I encourage you to seek Jesus and put him first above all else. It will be the best decision you could ever make.